It is Monday, May the 5th, 2025, aka Cinco de Mayo. How you guys doing today? Kevin O'Leary warned us years ago. He said, basically, China's economy was built on stolen ideas, fake numbers, and one giant illusion. And now it's coming true. Millions of homes abandoned mid-construction, banks, they're freezing people's life savings, protesters are disappearing, and the Chinese government, well, they're desperately scrambling behind the scenes, trying to stop the total collapse. And they're blaming President Trump for all of this. But here's the part that nobody's ready for. This isn't about China. This collapse is going to send shockwaves throughout the U.S. economy. And Kevin O'Leary says that we need to wake up fast. Now, in today's video, I'm going to expose this pattern that Kevin O'Leary is talking about, and I'm going to walk you through every piece of the collapse that's unfolding in real time, from the $13 trillion housing meltdown to the rural banks that are quietly vanishing overnight to TikTok surveillance, and more importantly, what Beijing is really planning with Taiwan that will directly affect the United States of America. And if you guys think that this doesn't affect you, think again, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why Kevin O'Leary is saying this particular crisis is going to rewrite the global economy and why you need to pay attention right now more than ever. So drop me a quick comment down below. Is anybody celebrating Cinco de Mayo? And if you are, where are you going? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. We're probably going to grab margaritas and probably about 2 hours. So I wanted to just jump on here real quick with you guys. Anybody margarita fans? Who makes the best margaritas? Like, tell me where to go. All right. I got about 2 hours before we go. Tell me the best place to get a margarita, please, guys. Anyway, stick with me, guys, because in the next couple minutes, we're going to cover the red flags. We're going to talk about the lies, the cold, hard truth that Kevin O'Leary saw coming years ago. And in spite of how he saw this years ago while everybody else was distracted. Now, this ain't speculation anymore, guys. This is the collapse, and it's already here. Oh, and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate you guys. So I'm also going to show you how Evergrande's $300 billion collapse is just the tip of the iceberg, and how millions of Chinese families are living in half-built apartments with no power, no water, and no way out. So stick with me, guys, because we got a lot to talk about today. But I want to make it quick because I want to go get these margaritas. By the way, does anyone not drink? If you don't drink, let me know about that too, because maybe some people don't even, they're like, I'm not doing Cinco de Mayo. Anyway, now, if you watch Shark Tank or any of his interviews, you already know Kevin O'Leary does not mince words. He don't care about anybody's feelings. But what he said about China should have been a wake-up call for every business owner, every policymaker, and every investor in the West. He didn't just say that, they were tough to negotiate with. He said this: there's a pattern with China, and you need to understand it. So what's the pattern? Rob, replicate, and replace. So they rob American innovation. This is why President Trump is really not friendly to China. They rob American innovation, stealing research, designs, product designs, even entire business models. They replicate it in their own factories using forced partnerships or maybe even state-sponsored hackers to speed up the process. And then they replicate the original American company by undercutting them globally with dirt cheap knockoffs. Now, Kevin, he gave a perfect example. He said a product called Drain Wig, right? A patent invention made right here in the United States designed to reduce plumbing costs in hotels. China copied it 40 times. 40. That's a freaking small business, guys. How's a small business going to compete with China? So what happened? Well, it died. And now multiply that by hundreds of U.S. companies and billions of dollars in stolen innovation. That's the kind of destruction that Kevin O'Leary was sounding the alarm on. And when President Trump stepped in with tariffs, Kevin O'Leary backed him up. Why? Because those tariffs weren't just a punishment. They were a long overdue correction to years of economic abuse. President Trump's tariffs hit China where it hurt, manufacturing exports. And for the first time, Beijing had to explain itself instead of exploit itself, right? And guess what, guys? They didn't know how to respond. While the media was screaming trade war this, trade war that, Kevin O'Leary, he called it smart business. He said tariffs were the only way to force China to come to the table and play by the rules. But China refused. They thought that they could wait it out. But now they're quietly removing tariffs on American goods, begging for talks and praying the U.S. lifts the Trump tariffs, and lets them kind of go back to the way that things were. But here's a little known fact, guys. The average person chooses a suboptimal Medicare plan and overpays by hundreds of dollars every single year. Chapter is solving this problem with a smarter approach. They're comparing every plan in your area. There's no bias. There's no sales gimmicks. They're just giving clear answers that are tailored for you. And I love them for that. People like Julie in Kansas. Julie is saving $400 every single year. Jamie in Texas, she's getting $600 back into her Social Security check. And their mission started with their own parents getting screwed over. And now they're helping thousands of people. I mean, big pat on the back for Chapter for that. Anyway, give our friends over at Chapter. If you're 65, maybe your parents are 65 or older, find out how much Chapter can save you. See if you can get a few $100s back a year. In fact, the average person is saving about $1,100 a year. The average senior is saving around $1,100 a year. It's a totally free call, and they're super nice. And when you call them, tell them I said hello. Tell them your buddy Ron told you to call. Hey, can you save me some money? Anything will help, right? You can give them a call at 909-563-8279, or you can visit them at askchapter.org/Ron. They are the best company for any kind of Medicare questions. Anyway, let's be clear, guys. Trump's tariffs, they expose just how fragile China's so-called growth model really was, if you think about it, right? And Kevin O'Leary, he called that fragility out before most politicians even knew that, what TikTok was. Most of these politicians, they're slow. But it's not just about trade, guys. China basically gives its companies access to our capital markets, but we don't get access to theirs. So China is not really reciprocal to the United States, and that's why Trump doesn't like it. Well, that's part of why Trump doesn't like it. Chinese courts are closed off. If a U.S. company sues for fraud, forget it. American businesses are forced into these 50-50 partnerships just to operate inside of China. It's not fair. And the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, they play by an entirely different set of rules. So Kevin O'Leary, he basically said it flat out. If China wants to be a big boy at the G8 table, they need to play by the same rules. But they never did. And now those shortcuts, that stolen growth, that rigged system, it's now imploding. And here's the kicker, guys. President Trump's tariffs didn't just expose the lie. They may have accelerated the collapse, because once the free ride ended, so did China's momentum. Now, stick with me, guys, because in just a minute, we're going to dive into what might be probably the most dangerous housing collapse in human history, with millions of homes sitting empty, mortgage payments in revolt, and China's so-called economic miracle on the verge of turning into a nightmare. So let's get into it. So let's zoom out. Actually, let's zoom in on what actually might be the most catastrophic housing collapse the world has ever seen. Forget about 2008 here in the United States. Because President Trump's tariffs didn't just rattle China's factories. They shook the foundation of China's real estate empire. And here's why this matters. In China, real estate isn't just a part of the economy. It is the economy. I mean, guys, we're talking about like 30% of the GDP for China is tied up in these buildings, like land sales and construction jobs. And for years, the Chinese Communist Party, they kept this machine alive by pumping it with cheap loans and easy credit. Everything looked fine over in the CCP until Trump hit them with tariffs on steel, tariffs on aluminum, tariffs on appliances, and more. And that forced the CCP to start slashing spending, delay projects, and panic about these export losses. So what did they do? Well, they leaned over even harder into real estate. They basically doubled down. And that was their fatal mistake. Because what's happening right now in China's housing market, It makes 2008 look like a dress rehearsal. We're talking over 60 million housing units sitting empty, over like 400 million square meters of unsold concrete, $13 trillion in unfinished or stalled housing projects. Guys, it's a disaster over there. That's like more than 8 times what all Chinese home buyers spent last year. But it's not just oversupply. It's a debt-fueled Ponzi scheme exposed by the economic slowdown triggered in part by Trump's tariff war. So Trump may have single-handedly collapsed China, our greatest adversary. But let's talk about Evergrande, right? This is the company that once symbolized China's rise. Back in 2018, Evergrande was like the largest real estate developer in Asia, right? But today, it's in default. They're buried in under $300 billion in debt. And here's how the scam worked, because that's what it is, exactly what it was. Developers like Evergrande, they would sell homes before construction even started. Buyers would pay in full and then wait. But instead of using that money to build the homes, these developers used it to buy more land, hoping to flip it for profit. And when the money got tight, they simply listed the unfinished homes already sold as assets to get more loans. It was all smoke and mirrors, a bunch of lies. And when the Trump tariffs started biting into those exports and manufacturing, well, then the CCP couldn't cut the spending or fix the fraud. They just poured more fuel into the housing bubble, trying to prop up GDP. But now it's all crashing down. You got mortgage boycotts. They have erupted across 300 plus housing projects. You've got thousands of families. They're living in half-built buildings with no electricity, no plumbing, no hope. It's a disaster. Like, some units are so raw, residents are hauling buckets of water up 6 flights of stairs, 6 floors just to bathe or cook. And you want to know what economic depression looks like? It looks like a 55-year-old woman sleeping in a concrete shell with no windows, because the home she spent her entire life savings on was never finished. And why did it happen? Well, it happened because you got local governments. They were hooked on selling land to these developers. They were making billions of dollars. So they looked the other way, even as developers used buyers' cash to inflate land prices and take on more and more debt. And guess what else happened, guys? China was feeling the squeeze from Trump's tariffs. They had to make up the lost revenue somewhere, and the only thing left to milk was real estate. But now the trust is gone. Buyers aren't buying, buyers aren't paying, homes aren't being built, and the debt is exploding, and it's only getting worse. Now, guys, we need to look at what happens when the housing collapse spills over into the banking system. Like, where the same people who lost their homes are now watching their life savings get frozen or just straight up wiped out overnight. And you're going to see exactly why or how Kevin O'Leary and, yes, even President Trump saw this economic contagion coming from a mile away. And why didn't the Democrats back him? Where were the Democrats in all of this? They're trying to help China. Well, if you guys thought that the housing market was bad, what's happening with China's banking system is downright terrifying, because when a country's banks start freezing deposits, it means the people have lost trust. And once the trust is gone, collapse is only a matter of time. So I want to break it down real quick for you guys, because China's real estate implosion, yes, partly caused by Trump's tariff squeeze, didn't just crush the developers. It's now pulling down the banks too. You see, when Trump launched his first wave of tariffs back in 2018, it wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It wasn't just a slap on exported goods. It was a financial exposure. This was a financial pressure campaign that shook the entire Chinese economy. Manufacturers tightened budgets, developers stopped paying bills, regional banks, they started to bleed out behind closed doors. But here's what's really going on, guys. Over 290 small banks in China, they were quietly absorbed into larger state-run banks in just the past year. Think about this. rural banks, they began freezing withdrawals, and in some towns, billions in deposits vanished without a trace. The People's Bank of China, they're now fighting off this slow motion bank run, hoping that no one notices before it's too late. And why they can't, why can't they just like repossess the properties when people default? Well, it's because most of the homes didn't even exist yet. That's the hidden danger. China's mortgages are collateralized by homes that are still under construction, many of which will probably never be finished. So this means that these banks, they can't even recover their losses. They're being forced to eat the defaults. And if this sounds very eerily familiar to you, there's a reason for that. This is exactly the same kind of systemic failure we saw in the 2008 U.S. financial crisis. But here's the big difference. The U.S. had a diversified economy. We had regulatory oversight and the U.S. dollar. China, they tied everything, literally everything, to real estate and some shadow banking. Now, I want to connect the dots to Trump's tariffs again, right? Because when Trump cut off China's export oxygen with these sweeping duties on aluminum, steel, tech, solar panels, washing machines, and remember, Democrats didn't support this at all. China didn't just lose money. China lost the margin that they were using to patch over these bad bank loans. That cash, the cash flow that they had that was propping up these zombie banks, once the tariffs hit and the global orders started slowing down, banks started to stop getting paid back. And people noticed that. Over in the city of Zhangzhou, over 1,000 protesters gathered outside of a rural bank after their accounts were frozen. Guys, the government sent in tanks, like military army tanks, literally. Does this sound like a staple system to you? Even the Communist Party's own internal reports admit that the situation is deteriorating. So they're trying to print and merge their way out of this thing, but it's too late. Public trust is gone. China's going down. So Kevin O'Leary, he warned that all this stuff is going to happen. Donald Trump's tariff war, it didn't just cause the rot, it exposed it. The CCP thought it could outmaneuver the U.S., but instead Trump cut off their air supply, and now banks are collapsing under the weight of their own corruption. And it gets worse because we're going to look at how this crisis isn't just about money anymore, guys. We're talking mass protests, collapsing dreams, record youth unemployment, and the return of something we haven't seen since 1989, open defiance of the Communist Party. Guys, the collapse is just getting started. So what happens when the people of a nation stop believing in their future? What happens when promises like job security, home ownership, and upward mobility start collapsing at the same time? That's what we're witnessing right now inside of China. Because the collapse that we've been talking about, it's not just economic anymore. This is a psychological, this is a emotional, this is turning into a full-blown rebellion against the Communist Party's social contract. So let's back up for a second, right? For decades, the CCP's unspoken promise to its people, it was very simple. Stay silent, don't challenge the party, we'll make sure you get rich, right? And for a while, it worked. Urbanization exploded, millions moved from villages to cities, entire families bought homes, they built businesses, and they believed in what the CCP called the Chinese dream. But that dream depended on one thing: constant economic growth. And then President Trump entered the chat. And when President Trump launched his tariff war against communist China, he basically didn't just change Beijing's global power, he punched a hole straight through the illusion. Then all of a sudden, Chinese factories started closing, exports started drying up, real estate froze. The CCP could no longer keep the prosperity lie alive. And then what followed? Well, a historic wave of civil unrest, not just students, not just fringe activists, but homebuyers, depositors, factory workers, young graduates, people who were told that their future was guaranteed. They're now standing in the streets chanting for change. So I'm going to show you how deep this collapse goes. And they're not talking about this on mainstream media. They're not going to talk about this too much on CNN and ABC and MSDNC. In 2024 alone, over 11.79 million college graduates entered the job market, only to find that a degree no longer guarantees a damn thing. Youth unemployment hit record highs. They were so bad that state media stopped reporting the number altogether. Online, a new term started trending called rotten tail kids, right? A grim pun on China's infamous ghost apartments, except now it's the youth who feel abandoned and empty. So, and some are working for less than their parents made 20 years ago. Others are giving up entirely. And while this generation is struggling just to find work, the older generation cannot afford to retire. Guys, China has over 94 million citizens over the age of 60 still working just to survive. They were promised security. They were handed inflation and instability instead. And why? Because the CCP gambled on real estate and export dominance. Trump's tariffs cut off their lifeline, plain and simple. There's no more easy money coming from the US. There's no more passive trade surpluses. There's no more endless demands for Chinese-made goods. Guys, Trump's tariffs were a wake-up call that exposed just how fragile the CCP's economic strategy really was. But Beijing didn't fix the underlying issues. They tightened control, they censored dissent, they deployed riot police, they learned nothing. In one province, thousands of protesters were dragged off of the street after banks froze their accounts. Guys, videos were wiped from Chinese internet platforms within hours. Some protests, they were never seen again. Some of these protesters were never seen again. So you wonder what happened to them. And yet, more keep rising, more keep marching. Because when the dream dies, fear disappears. And that's what Kevin O'Leary has been warning about all along. You can only lie for so long to your people for so long. You can only rob and manipulate the global system for so long. Eventually, the curtain falls. Trump saw it. O'Leary called it out. Now it's playing out. And of course, we need to shift into the technology front, like how China's surveillance state, social media apps, and these spy techs have turned global, and why TikTok could be the next domino to fall. And yes, President Trump's tariffs are showing up there too. So do not go anywhere, guys. What's happening right now could affect your phone, your data, your privacy in all sorts of ways that you didn't expect. By now, most people probably understand that China isn't just a global manufacturer. It's a global surveillance power. And it didn't get there by playing fair. In fact, Kevin O'Leary, he's been warning for years. There's a pattern with China. Rob, replace, replicate. And it applies to tech more than anything else. And once again, President Trump, he saw it too. And he responded not with tweets, but with tariffs. So I want to talk about what actually matters here, guys. President Trump's tariffs didn't just hit Chinese steel and solar panels. He also targeted tech products, components, and data infrastructure that was tied to state-owned or CCP-backed firms. That included semiconductors, robotics, telecom equipment, even certain electronics tied to national security threats. Now, this was no coincidence. Guys, Trump understood something most leaders ignored. China was building its tech empire by stealing ours. And TikTok, that was just the tip of the iceberg. So let's break it down real quick, right? So TikTok is not just a social media app. It's a CCP-controlled data funnel. Now, despite it being owned by a company called ByteDance, every decision is ultimately made by the Chinese Communist Party, thanks to something called a golden share. That means Xi Jinping himself has veto power over what happens to the app. And Trump knew that. He was the first U.S. president to publicly push for TikTok to be banned or forced into a U.S.-approved sale. Why? Because millions of Americans are handing over biometrics, voice prints, location data, behavioral patterns to a company directly accountable to the CCP. And even now, several US states are moving to ban TikTok following in Trump's footsteps. But China's digital war didn't stop there. There's a new app that's emerging from the shadows called Red Note, right? Has anyone heard of Red Note? Already operating illegally in the US with servers based in China. It collects private data. Red Note is violating US cybersecurity laws. And yes, Red Note is another surveillance tool, masquerading as a social media. Well, Trump's tariffs didn't just restrict physical goods. They were a part of a broader economic firewall designed to slow China's infiltration into Western tech. And he made it expensive for China to export surveillance gear, sensors, cameras, and telecoms into the United States. And now, the CCP is scrambling to build its next generation of surveillance tools. But this time, they're doing it without access to Western markets because the tariff cuts their profit line, and it's working. You got companies like Huawei, like ZTE, once seen as unstoppable. They're now under sanctions. They're under export bans and price pressure, right? Even Kevin O'Leary recently said these companies are not playing by the rules. If they want access to our economy, they need to stop spying. And that's the whole point. The tech theft isn't just about the competition. It's about the control. It's about owning the data, manipulating the narrative, and outmaneuvering the West. But Trump's tariffs, they forced China to reveal its strategy. They exposed the surveillance goals behind the products. They made the US and its allies finally say no. Still, we're just getting started, guys, because we need to look at the industrial complex collapse inside China that nobody's talking about. Guys, profits are plunging. Household borrowing is crashing. And green energy, their golden goose, it's not even saving them. And yes, Trump's tariffs are tied to that too. So let's talk about the heart of China's economy. This is the real industrial engine here, right? Now, for years, China's been seen as the world's factory, right? And they offer cheap labor, endless exports, global dominance. Companies like Amazon benefited greatly from products coming from China. But now the engine is sputtering, and President Trump's tariffs help pull the spark plug. So look at the numbers. China's industrial profits have declined for 3 straight years. 2024, profits fell another 3.3%. Automakers, well, they're down 8%. Tech and green energy companies, they're failing to offset the broader losses. And here's the hidden truth that the media won't say. When Trump imposed massive tariffs, starting with $50 billion back in 2018 and expanding to over $360 billion in Chinese goods, he didn't just start a trade war. He forced China's industrial sector into a stress test that it couldn't pass. You see, most Chinese manufacturers operated on razor-thin margins. They relied on volume, not quality. So when Trump made their goods more expensive in the US, buyers looked elsewhere. Orders dried up. The factories began to shut down. All of a sudden, China's plan to dominate electric vehicles and solar panels and semiconductors and robotics, all that stuff hit a wall. But here's the kicker. China thought it could outlast Trump. They hoped the tariffs were a temporary inconvenience. But instead, the U.S. started reshoring the jobs. India, Vietnam, Mexico, they started gaining new contracts. And then all of a sudden, the illusion of China's industrial dominance, they cracked wide open. And if you look at if you look from the household level, this is where it gets personal. Guys, household borrowing has turned negative in China. People are not taking out loans to buy homes or cars anymore. They're hoarding cash, or they're trying to because they no longer trust the Chinese banking system. And part of that breakdown in trust, if you think about it, it traces all the way back to the economic shocks that were triggered by Trump's tariff regime. By slamming the brakes on these cheap exports, Trump exposed just how dependent China's middle class had become on the illusion of this endless growth. Now, that illusion's dead. Why? Well, it's because, as Kevin O'Leary predicted, you can't paper over a broken model. At some point, the math just catches up. And right now, the math ain't mathin'. The CCP tried everything: tax cuts, local bailouts, central bank easing, infrastructure splurges, even begging the U.S. to roll back the tariffs. But the damage was already done. Now, here's the tragic irony. The more they try to fix it, the more obvious it becomes that Trump's tariffs were not the problem. They were the mirror. Trump's tariffs exposed the rot. They revealed the dependence. They accelerated the reckoning. Now, of course, you got to look at the big picture, right? The global consequences of this collapse. Like, will China drag the rest of the world into a new recession? Are Trump's tariffs now shaping international trade policy for good? And more importantly, what happens when the CCP runs out of tricks? Well, stick with me, guys, because it is all connected. So now, we covered the real estate disaster. We talked about the frozen banks, the tech theft, the collapsing factories. Now we need to talk about the real question that really matters, right? What does it all mean for us here in America and for the rest of the world? Because China's collapse isn't happening in a vacuum, right? And President Trump's tariffs didn't just shake Beijing. They're now rewriting the rules of global trade. I mean, we saw what happened with the S&P 500 initially when Trump announced on Liberation Day the Trump tariffs, right? So let me explain. When Trump first launched the tariff war back in 2018, critics were saying he was reckless. They called it dangerous, inflationary, even xenophobic. But now, even China is quietly admitting that Trump's strategy worked. So here's how. So Beijing, they're now exempting over 25% of U.S. exports from tariffs. This is clearly a very desperate move to restart stalled trade channels. Xi Jinping is forced back to the negotiating table just to try to salvage China's collapsing manufacturing base. Of course, we got Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently confirming that China is begging for relief on tariffs because without it, they risk losing up to 10 million jobs. And what does this tell us? Guys, this tells us that Trump's tariffs were never just about punishing China. They were about resetting global leverage. They showed that the U.S. could withstand short-term economic pressure in order to expose long-term Chinese fraud. The S&P 500 losses have already been recovered. The S&P 500 had it had probably the best April in several years, and May is just now starting. And so now we're seeing the ripple effects. TikTok, once the crown jewel of Chinese soft power, they're now a bargaining chip in these trade talks. Multiple U.S. states banned it. The federal government may follow and ultimately ban it. But as Kevin O'Leary warned, the app isn't owned by ByteDance. It's actually owned by the Chinese Communist Party. And thanks to Trump's tariffs, firms are now expanding into Mexico, Canada, Mexico, India, and South Asia. And I think the message is pretty clear. It's too risky. It's too risky to do business in a country that plays dirty and just can't deliver stability. Other nations are now implementing their own America First policies. The EU, Canada, and Australia, they're now rethinking trade relationships with China. Because if Trump's tariffs proved anything, it's this. You don't have to bow down to Beijing. And get this, guys. China's global and their entire global image as the rising superpower, this next economic hegemon, it is fading fast. Not because of war, not because of missiles or rockets or bullets, not because of sanctions, but because Trump exposed their weakest link. Fake growth, fake numbers, fake partnerships. And I think Kevin O'Leary said it best. If you want to be in the G8, you got to play by the rules. And China didn't do it. So now they're bleeding jobs, they're freezing savings, and they're watching their golden age crumble. So there's still one question we got to answer. What's the final domino? Like, could this really collapse? Like, could this collapse trigger a 2008 style global recession? Will the CCP bail out every failing sector, or are they going to let them burn? And what does Kevin O'Leary predict is going to fall next? Well, this is the most important part here because Chinese banks are cracking. The real estate market is rotting. Youth unemployment is exploding and civil unrest is spreading like wildfire. But the real question is this: what's the final domino? Like, what happens when a nation built on borrowed money, stolen innovation, and suppressed dissent finally runs out of rope? And could President Trump's tariffs be the trigger that starts this whole global chain reaction? Well, let's go ahead and connect the dots real quick. Trump didn't slap tariffs on cheap electronics and steel. He exposed the CCP's dependency on American demand, on American capital, and on a trade system that they rigged for decades. He showed the world that economic confrontation, even with the likes of China, when done right, can reveal the truth faster than a war ever could. And now we're seeing the truth unfold in real time. Trump's total government debt is on track to hit 74.2% of GDP by 2026. Guys, that's higher than the debt levels after the 2009-2008 global financial crisis. But this time, their growth can't keep up. They've already issued a record 10 trillion yuan in new bonds just to try to plug the holes. But it's not enough. The ship is sinking. Trump's tariffs didn't just cut into their profits. They removed the illusion that China could grow forever. They dismantled the myth of this unstoppable dragon. And now the world sees it. And this was always a house of cards. And here's the kicker. If the Chinese collapse spreads, if global banks start writing down Chinese assets, if supply chains continue to shift, if consumer confidence evaporates across Asia, we could be looking at a second global recession. Just like in 2008, only this time, it's not going to be Wall Street or the S&P 500 that triggers it. It could be Wuhan to Wenzhou. It'll be the factory towns. It'll be the ghost cities, the frozen banks, and broken trust. Kevin O'Leary warned us. He said, hey, look, there's a pattern. When a system stops rewarding risk and starts punishing honesty, collapses become inevitable. And Trump? He didn't just warn us, he forced it into the open. From his Section 301 tariffs to push to decouple American industries from China, from his demands to ban TikTok to his enforcement of IP protections, Trump rewired the global conversation. And now China is standing in the middle of that wreckage, just trying to pretend like everything's fine. But it's not. Factories are closing, bank runs are escalating, and the CCP, they're running out of Band-Aids. So I think it's pretty clear where we're at right now, guys, right? So what's next to fall? Is it TikTok? Is it the banking sector? Is it Xi Jinping's grip on power? I don't know yet. But one thing is very clear. Kevin O'Leary was right. Trump's tariffs worked. And the collapse is no longer a prediction. It's happening right now. So if you guys want to stay ahead of what's coming up next, if you want to understand how this collapse affects you, and if you're ready to take control of your financial future in a very, very unpredictable world, do me a favor, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and join me in the comments down below, because this story is far from over. I tell you what, guys, the CCP is cracking, the world is watching, and Trump's tariffs may have just changed history. Give our friends over at Chapter a call, see if they can save you some money. And when you call our friends over at Chapter, of course, I'll leave the link in the description down below. If you want to hit them up on the web or give them a call, tell them Ron said hello, and see how much you can save. $500, $1,100, who knows?